He would not be home. Well, I was so wrong. As I sat there playing with the little kids, putting them to bed, reading them their books, my aunt told me to stay in her bedroom because my little 4-year-old cousin was getting up a lot at night and going into their room, and they didn't want him to be confused. So I'll never forget sitting there as now a 13-year-old, watching some Dateline story. I'll never forget it. And suddenly I'm hearing noises downstairs. Well, of course, when you're 13, alone in a house with the kids sleeping, your mind starts to go. Starting to think someone broke in, someone's down there. I kept looking at the door. Well, then I tried convincing myself it's just the furnace going on. It's wintertime. It's just this, and I kept trying to make excuses. Till finally I got myself so paranoid, I just turned up the volume so I couldn't hear the noises. Well, the next time I heard the noise, it was the door closing. Standing there was that cousin of mine. Of course, I jumped off that bed so fast, in panic, asking him, "What are you doing home? Why are you here? You're not supposed to be here." Oh, well, I decided I didn't want to spend the night at my friend's house. Well, of course, because he knew his younger cousin is at home alone, in his home with his 2 little brothers, gives him the opportunity to abuse me. And that's exactly what he did. After I ran through the entire house as he was chasing me, he finally got me back up into his parents' bedroom, locked me in the room, and sexually assaulted me for the next 2.5 hours. Wasn't until we heard the garage door open and his parents coming home that he jumped up for the very last time in my life and looked at me and said, "Erin, this is our little secret. No one will believe you. Don't tell anyone." And that was the last time my cousin ever laid a hand on me. So you're probably wondering, well, why? Did somebody find this little diary and read it? No, that wasn't the case. A few weeks later, it was spring break. I'm up at the lake house with my younger sister and a friend. We're walking up the street, and my little 11-year-old sister blurts out, "Brian's gross." I'll never forget just standing there on the street and looking at her and saying, "He's doing it to you too?" For the next 4 hours, my sister sat there and told me one incident after another of how this cousin had also abused her. Incidents where we were at the same holidays, and after he went after me, he went after her. I remember being so angry. But something else came to me. I realized with her coming forward, somebody has to believe us. And so we told our parents the next day. And I told my sister how much this is going to change our life forever, but we have to tell somebody. Well, of course, my parents, as any parents would be, were devastated. My mother was bawling her eyes out, couldn't believe that this was going on right under everyone's nose. Well, my parents ended up confronting his parents. His parents sat down and confronted my cousin Brian. Brian, of course, flat out denied it. And they were fine with that. They were standing by their son's side. So after numerous attempts from my parents and his parents to work together to do something about what their son had done, my parents wanting him to get psychological help, well, they were not willing to work with us. So my parents did the only thing left to do, and that was contact the police. So when my parents talked to a detective that was assigned our case, they referred us to this picture you're seeing, the Children's Advocacy Center. And it is this place in northwest Cook County, Illinois, this place behind me, is one of the reasons that I'm able to stand on this stage and speak to all of you. It's because I walked through these doors and my life forever changed. See, I walked into this place with so much fear and confusion, thinking these people, they're not going to believe me, thinking they're going to call me a liar just like my cousin had told me. But that was the complete opposite of what had happened. I ended up realizing these people are on my side. These people believe me. These people continued as I sat there on this interview with the forensic interviewer, reminding me that this was not my fault. Your cousin will never lay a hand on you again. We will make sure of that. And suddenly, the more and more I was able to talk about this very dirty, shameful thing that had happened to me, this weight was being lifted. And I soon saw the advocate consoling my mother She's bawling her eyes out, feeling like she failed her children, finally able to calm her down. And I remember, as I say, walking out of there, my sister and I, feeling as if 10 pounds were lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally breathe again. I finally wasn't keeping this secret all locked inside of me. Somebody else knew. I walked out of there knowing I don't have to worry about him ever hurting me again. And as we walked out of there that day, back in my mind, I thought to myself, someday I'm going to come back here and thank these people. Well, I soon after that began therapy at the center, and then I was also in a girls' group with other girls that had been abused. Unlike my friends who couldn't understand the nightmares, the flashbacks, these people did. These other girls that I was with understood because they went through the same exact thing. And it really helped both my sister and I move forward, along with my parents that were in these support groups at the center. Well, shortly after we were interviewed, my cousin was brought into the police department, where, to our shock and surprise, he confessed. After confessing to 3 counts, they arrested him, told him what he did was wrong, now looked at my parents, the detective, and said, "You have the choice to take this to trial, or we can screen him through juvenile court. If you take it to trial, your daughters are going to have to get on the witness stand and testify against their cousin. And a defense attorney will ask questions like, Erin, why didn't you tell after the first time this happened? Why did you let it go on for 2 years?" The detective was just preparing my mother for what it would be like. Or you can screen him through the juvenile court system because he was a juvenile, and your kids will never have to testify, and we will make sure he gets the mandated help that he needs. Well, that's the path we went, so my sister and I would never have to face him in a courtroom. A few months later, he was given 7 years probation, 2 years in a sex offender treatment program, couldn't come within 100 feet of my sister and I, and 1,000 hours of community service. We were satisfied. We just wanted to move on with our lives. Well, we later found out his mother fought with the state's attorney. The state's attorney did not see the years of abuse that had gone on. She's only seeing 3 counts. And she dropped 7 years probation down to 6 months, and drops a sex offender treatment program for 2 years to my aunt finding a private therapist who had to submit a letter to the state's attorney saying that she saw him. And that state's attorney already had the letter and read it to my mother. I met with Brian a few times. He admits his wrongdoing and says he will not make the same mistake. Well, I'm sorry, I've had enough therapy in my life. You meet someone a few times, you pretty much get down the basics. Where you go to school, who do you live with? So we were pretty devastated that he did not get the help that he needed. But you see, here I had told this secret. I was still keeping that secret from when I was much younger. I saw how devastated my parents were when they found out that our cousin had done this. There was no way I can tell them about the other perpetrator in my life. So I kept silent about it. I wanted to protect my parents from feeling like they failed their kids. And soon after speaking out and finally finding my voice, I began having all these reoccurring nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks. I could be in school taking a math test, walking down the hall, sitting in the cafeteria, and in a blink of an eye, I'm suddenly revisiting this incident of being abused in a closet, being held down on a bed, being trapped somewhere and being sexually abused. It was constantly following me. I'll never forget, suddenly I'm now turning to a diary every night. Dear God, where are you? Please make this stop. What do I have to do? Constantly praying to God every night. You are the only one that knows how much I am suffering. I hide it from Mom and Dad. I don't want them to know that this is happening. Please just make it stop. I'm begging you. Well, soon, by the time I got to my sophomore year of high school, I thought life was not worth living anymore and attempted suicide. Thank God I was raised in a good Christian home, because I'll never forget, after writing that goodbye note to my parents, swallowing an entire bottle of pills, climbing into bed, and I thought to myself, wait, this is a sin. Am I going to go to a lot worse place by killing myself and not go to that heavenly place where I feel like I'll be in peace? I literally found myself that night over the toilet, throwing up all these pills, bawling my eyes out. Well, then when I realized, okay, I failed at this, what's the next step that I can do to make these nightmares and flashbacks stop? Of course, they had had me in therapy, but I didn't like talking about this uncomfortable topic. I hated talking about it. Always changed the subject whenever I was with a therapist. So one day, walking up the street, and thought about something I had read in a magazine. It was about a girl that used self-injury. It would soon become my very unhealthy coping mechanism. Suddenly, I found myself all the time having these nightmares and flashbacks and just pulling out razors, going into the bathrooms in the high school, at home, anywhere I was, and cutting. The physical pain was far more bearable than the emotional pain that I was going through. I couldn't bear it, and suddenly found this unhealthy outlet. Well, soon one of my best friends found out, told the school psychologist, who then had to sit down and tell my parents, who then had me in private therapist, they had me seeing a psychiatrist, you name it. Suddenly I found myself taking antidepressants, sleep medication, anxiety medication, and one day I came to this realization. It was at the end of my junior year, and I thought to myself, I have let this cousin of mine steal another day of my joy and happiness. Every day that I'm constantly reliving this. So one night, I sat in front of my computer, he's away at college, looked his email address up, and wrote him a 5-page letter confronting this cousin. I poured so much anger into this letter because I wanted him to know how much he had changed my life, how he had gotten off of the slap on the wrist, and how I wanted to hold him accountable. Never expected a response back. But he did. He responded, and for the next 7 months, we corresponded back and forth in letters. Me trying to get answers. Why did you do this? Him responding back. It's ripping me apart. You reliving all these memories that you're telling me about what you did. When I get the thought or hear about my cousin, it rips me apart, knowing what I did. Well, I would write another letter, and he'd write another. Finally, I realized in confronting him, I was finding my voice. The same voice that this cousin had silenced me with, began to feel empowered. And I began telling myself, I'm not going to be quiet about this anymore. I'm going to do something about this. But in order to get to that place, I realized, as I continued to write these letters to my cousin, I was holding on to so much anger, hatred, and bitterness towards him. I was letting him take another day of my life. Every day I stayed angry. So one day I received a letter of him apologizing, asking for forgiveness, telling me I understand if you won't accept this, but I just want you to know that I am sorry.